So today is the 21st Sunday after Pentecost. We are again back in Kentucky. And the Mass today is the Mass of the Day of Death and Burial, on the 30-day Masses, and the for my mother that died October the 2nd, and the 30th day will be October the 31st. So then the epistle will read from the epistle, which would normally be the epistle for today, the 21st Sunday after Pentecost, from St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians, chapter 6. Brethren, be strengthened in the Lord in the might of his power. Put on the armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For our wrestling is against flesh and blood. But our wrestling is not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and the powers, against the worldly rulers of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in high places. Therefore take up the armor of God, that you may be able to resist in the evil day, and stand in all things perfect. Stand therefore, having girded your loins with truth, and having put on the breastplate of justice, and having put your feet shod with the readiness of the gospel of peace, and all things taking up the shield of faith, with which you may be able to quench all the fiery darts of the most wicked one. And take unto you the helmet of salvation, and the sword of the Spirit, that is, the word of God. And the gospel, taking that according to St. Matthew, chapter 18. At that time Jesus spoke to his disciples this parable. The kingdom of heaven is like unto a king, who desired to settle accounts with his servants. And when he had begun the settlement, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. And as he had no means of paying, his master ordered him to be sold with his wife and children and all that he had, and payment to be made. But the servant fell down and besought him, saying, Have patience with me, and I will pay thee all. And moved with compassion, the master of that servant released him, and forgave him the debt. But as that servant went out, he met one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. And he laid hold of him, and he throttled him, saying, Pay what thou owest. His fellow servant therefore fell down, and began to entreat him, saying, Have patience with me, and I will pay thee all. But he would not, but went away and cast him into prison until he should pay what was due. His fellow servants, therefore, seeing what had happened, were very much saddened, and they went and informed their master of what had taken place. When then his master called him and said to him, Wicked servant, I forgave thee all the debt, because thou didst entreat me. Shouldst not thou also have had pity upon thy fellow servant, even as I have pity on thee? And his master, being angry, handed him over to torturers until he should pay all that was due to him. So also my heavenly Father will do to you, if you do not forgive each of you, forgive your brothers from your hearts. Thus are the words of today's Holy Gospel. Father, Son, Holy Ghost, amen. Now, today, a few considerations on a renewed popular topic in our situation in the church today, which is being brought up in the Novashota world and more in recent times. And the topic is the Pope the Pope? The topic of sedevacantism. Father Altman has become very popular in the last year or two because he said no Democrat can be a Catholic, can't be a Catholic and a Democrat at the same time. Bishop punished him. And now recently, a few months ago, he declared that it is self-evident in our Constitution, in the said American Constitution, we hold these truths to be self-evident, and all men are created equal. But as Father Altman said, we hold this truth to be self-evident, that Jorge Bergoglio is not a Catholic, and he is a heretic, not a member of the church, and therefore he cannot be Pope. Listed 20 heresies of Pope Francis. Then also Bishop of Vigano, Archbishop Vigano, who has been the secret voice of the good guys, who Father Hugo said a couple of years ago, there's like a new Archbishop Lefebvre, and many other people have said similar things, that he has imperfections because he still says the new Mass, he has imperfections because he's still trapped in the Novus world, although he's in hiding, but he's saying things Archbishop Lefebvre would have said, many people say, Archbishop Vigano. And then you have Archbishop Schneider. And Bishop Schneider is also saying many good things. And so now there's a debate. And then the great speakers on the battle of tradition, which are those who have the most number of hits upon the websites. So you have the Kennedy Report, and then you have also, Taylor Marshall and many others, each one of them weighing in the fight and writing, teaching to others about their expertise on the matter. And so the sedevacantism question has come up again in recent times as something new. In fact, it's very similar to the whole rotation of error in all times in history. You look at the history of evolution, for instance, since evolutionists can't prove their point, they rotate their explanation of evolution. That it happened gradually through a gradual process of gradual transformism, and that slowly things evolved one to another, not finding the links between them, finding their missing links. They then switched to a punctuated equilibrium and a catastrophe theory, that things evolved so quickly from one species to another, and then this theory loses its vogue and rotate back to the former theory by giving it a new name. Then rotate back to theory B and give it a new name. And they have new discoveries and new discoveries and new discoveries, and you find the same two discoveries repeated over and over again. And because people have a short memory, they don't recall that this is a very familiar subject and a very familiar topic that's been brought up many times, refuted and answered many times. Now we have a situation where, once again, there's a renewed popularity of the problem of sedevacantism. And it's interesting to note that many people are scandalized. Now I would argue here that it's very good signs, that it's the next step in the satanic fight of destroying our church. The easiest way to describe it is, two cops meet a man who's guilty apparently of a crime. One is a good cop and the other is the bad cop. The good cop and the bad cop both talk to the man, and they argue with each other, and they fight with each other. And so the criminal begins to believe maybe the good cop is on his side, and the bad cop is his enemy. And he slowly gravitates towards the good cop. And the good cop argues against the bad cop, and the bad cop argues against the good cop. The good cop is nice and honest and fair and caring, and the bad cop is dishonest, a scumbag, a criminal, and a crook, and evil, and out to just get more arrests. And over time, the defendant begins to trust the good cop. He then tells him things. A little bit later, there's a trial. On the trial, he never sees the bad cop. Bad cop's out busy arresting other people. But when he gets to the trial, the good cop shows up and he sits in the stand and he says, "This man is a total criminal. He admitted to this, he admitted to that, he told me this, he told me that, throw him in jail." And the defendant says, "But you were the good cop, you were the nice one. You were the one I trusted. And so how can you be the one to throw me in jail?" And he gets thrown in jail. Enter our present situation, and we have a good cop and a bad cop. But in our situation today is, if you're a sedevacantist, well then Father Altman and Bishop Vigano are the good cop, and Bishop Schneider is the bad one. But if you're an anti-sedevacantist, then Bishop Schneider is the good cop, and Bishop Vigano and Father Altman are the bad ones. And we see so many good signs. We say there are good signs because at least they're talking about the problem of the papacy. Just like in former times, back in 1988, other people besides Bishop Marcel Lefebvre would say, these are good signs. They're not talking about the errors and heresies of Vatican II in 88, But at least they're talking about the Mass. And now they're allowing us to have the Mass. Now it's not the answer, because we know that the principal problem in the church is the faith. But at least they're giving us a Latin Mass. And the indult movement was born. Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre said in 88 and 89 about those people who said the Latin Trinity Mass with the approval of Pope John Paul II. About those people who said they preferred the Latin Mass over the new Mass. He said those people that prefer Latin Mass over the new Mass, those people who say it's that we have now approved Masses from the Pope, they are traitors. They have betrayed us, they have betrayed us, they have betrayed us. 3 times he said it. They are traitors. Of course we want the Latin Mass. Of course we want tradition back in the church. But at what price? They are being told you can have your Latin Mass on the condition that you accept the Novus Ordo sacrilege. They are being told you can have the Latin Mass on the condition you go along with all the modern baloney and be quiet about the principal problems. And many argue we got to go slowly. We've got to go slowly. We shouldn't rush through this whole crisis, but patiently and slowly. You've got a son who's left away from God. Don't tell him to go to church. Tell him first to believe in God. After he believes in God, then you tell him he should be a Christian. After he becomes a Christian, then you can say the Catholic Church is better than all the Protestant ones. After he becomes a Catholic, you can tell him stay away from modernism. After he stays away from modernism, then you can tell him be a traditional Catholic. Now there's 5,000 varieties of traditional Catholics. Now you've got to tell him stay from all the bad traditional Catholics. And if you're lucky, your son leaves the faith when he's 20. And you get him Catholic before he turns 97. As he goes through all the 50,000 possible steps to slowly work his way to heaven. But what if he dies before he turns 97? What if he believes you when you tell him, just be a Christian? And then he stops believing you and he says, no, you've got to be a Catholic. Then what? You become a tool to help your son go to hell. Now, there's several levels in hell. There's a really hot, clear flame. Then there's a less hot, white, blue flame, and the less hot, yellow flame, and the coolest orange flame. So they get to burn in the orange flame. They get to burn in the yellow flame. They get to burn in the white flame. They get to burn in the blue flame, and none of them feel good. And all of them are in hell. It is not our goal to move someone from the clear flame to the blue flame to the white to the yellow flame to the orange or bright red flame to the orange flame. It is our purpose to get all people out of hell completely. And it's the same way with regard to error, which leads souls to hell. We aren't to get people away from some errors. We are to get them away from all errors which will lead them to damnation. Now consider this possibility. The devil hasn't changed his tactics very much in the last 6,000 years. What we've seen in the past is the good cop, bad cop system works very well if you want to incriminate someone. In this case here, we have Archbishop Schneider on one side and Bishop Vigano on the other. Now these two are good cop and bad cop based upon what side you're on. So if you're anti-sedevacantist, Bishop Vigano is a good, Bishop Schneider is a good cop. And Vigano is now the bad one. Archbishop Vigano is going to give a talk via the internet at Pittsburgh Conference just a few weeks ago of the ecumenical traditional conference put on by Michael Matt. Gather all the clans together. Let's all hug one another and love Jesus as long as we have the Latin Mass. And they gathered together, and then in the conference, Bishop Vigano gave an internet speech. The internet speech says essentially, Francis Bergoglio is not the Pope. So, the speech was canceled. They pushed the delete button instead of the play button. The speech was still done on the computer, and you can still watch it. It just didn't get played at that conference. And so Bishop Vigano is on the side now of he must not be the Pope. Father Altman has joined that crew and so many others in the Nova Scotia world. Reminds me of when I was a young priest in Phoenix, Arizona. There's a pertinent part of the ceremony where the server moves the book from the epistle side down to the bottom to the gospel side. And we had two young boys that were twins serving Mass, both of them slightly on the touched side. One boy went up to grab the missal, he brought it down. And your brother said, "It's my turn to get the missal." So he grabbed the missal. And yeah, you can't have the missal, it's my missal. And so they pulled back and forth and pulled back and forth. Fists started flying, and Father Dean was not able to finish Mass. Because one of the problems about Mass is you need the missal. Now they said, "It's my turn to take the missal." No, it's my turn to take the missal. And bang, bang. Fantastic and circles. Now, Father Dean was a very sensitive priest. He didn't know what to do, so he just froze on the altar scared until some people came in and decided to pull the guys off the altar and get the missal and bring it up to the altar. Because at some point, Mass has to continue and you need a missal. It's part of it. The idea of removing it from one side to the other is because you're going from the epistle side to the gospel side, not you're going to take the book away and have a fight about it at the bottom of the steps. Now, it doesn't matter who wins the fight. So long as they're fighting at the bottom of the steps, the book never gets to where it's supposed to go, and you can't continue Mass. I believe it's very possible what's happening right now, from the devil's perspective in the combat against the Holy Roman Catholic faith. There's a good cop. For us, the good cop is Schneider, because we're against sedevacantism. And there's another good cop, and that's Vigano. For Bishop Sanborn, he says, Vigano is very encouraging. He's a sedevacantist. And there's the bad cop. Well, for us, the bad cop is Vigano, because he has unfortunately fallen into the trap of sedevacantism. But then, for the sedevacantist, the bad cop is Schneider. What's happening? Two guys are fighting on their way down into a pit. But until they get out of the pit or off of the sliding board and back to the solid ground of our holy faith, no matter which side wins, we lose. Remember that there's two reasons to murder someone. Because you want their money or because you want justice. Either way, it's murder. You don't have the right to kill someone because they're a murderer. You don't have the right to kill someone because they've got your money or because they've got money you want. It's murder. One murder is murder for the sake of greed. Another is murder for the sake of justice. Both are murderers and both are justly hung by the government. One does not have the right to kill a murderer. The government alone can do that. So very often, even though one of us is right and the other one is wrong, if we engage in this kind of fight, we're both wrong and in the wrong battle. Why are we going to be encouraged by all these people? Like Father Hugo said a few years ago several times, Vigano is speaking like Archbishop Lefebvre. Of course, he doesn't fully believe that, but he begins to say that. Bishop Sanborn says, Vigano is very encouraging. So is Father Altman. He knows they've got problems. He doesn't accept the Novoshoto. He hates the Novoshoto, etc. But what happens? Instead of the Novoshoto sliding to tradition like we think is happening, these are all means to get traditionalists to slide to the Novoshoto. It's like Archbishop Lefebvre used to say many times, the superiors inform and shape the inferiors, not the other way around. The superiors shape the inferiors, the superiors form the inferiors, and the inferiors often try to want to shape the superiors. You tell a young girl, you want to marry this guy who's got spots, who's a serial killer, who's a druggie, who's violent. Why do you want to marry him? Because I'm going to fix him. Now, when you marry him, no, he's not going to get fixed. But that's the intention for the marriage. And we tell them, no, you don't marry a man like that, because you don't marry a guy to fix him. You marry him to have children that are going to go to heaven. And all those things are not beneficial for a father of children that are on the way to heaven. So don't marry him. No, I'm going to fix him. And they say inside the Novus Ordo Church, at least they're saying the new Mass, the traditional Mass, at least the bishop said the Latin Mass is okay. So I'm going to fix the church from the inside. The superiors form the inferiors, not the other way around. The superiors are the ones who make the things happen. Who are the superiors? Representatives of the Novus Ordo Church, although neither of them are in official positions of authority, but they're both in good standing, unlike us. Happen to be Archbishop Vigano and Bishop Schneider. They're still in the system. They're still approved. One hiding, maybe he's in Boston, Kentucky. The other one elsewhere. One lives on cyberspace with Father Morrison, and the other one lives in Europe, Eastern Europe. But the fact is, what's the problem? We want to see our superiors say good things. I remember when I was a child, the conservatives in this area used to say, "Did you hear John Paul II? He was so wonderful. He told the priests and clerics they should wear their clerical garb." The same day he said the death penalty is against the law of God. They didn't hear that one, which is against the Bible. They didn't hear that one, which is against the perennial teaching of the church, against the law of God. They just didn't hear that. But they heard John Paul II said, wear your clerical garb. And so they didn't look at the whole picture of John Paul II, Pope John Paul II. What's the whole picture of our present situation? Novus Ordo people are fighting over whether the Pope is the Pope. They're fighting over tradition. Last year, or a year and a half, a little less than a year and a half ago, I visited a Novus Ordo priest in California. Very good Mexican priest. He was excommunicated or suspended by our lovely bishop or cardinal in Los Angeles, California, because he said abortion is murder. And he said abortion is wrong. And he said Catholics can't vote pro-abortion. He was thrown out. That priest is now saying in private houses the Novus Ordo Mass. He does charismatic prayers and the Novus Ordo Mass in people's houses. So if you go into Bob's house, you can get the Latin Mass unapproved. But if you go to Ralph's house, you can have charismatic prayers unapproved. If you go to another house, it's not all like the charismatic prayers. He says only the Novus Ordo Mass, exactly like it's supposed to be, without the charismatic prayers. That's in Jorge's house. And so you can go to whatever house you want to and find an illegal Latin Mass, an illegal charismatic prayer service, or an illegal Latin Mass. It's like we're sliding down a hill and fighting on secondary matters without the primary. And the primary is the 12 articles of our Holy Creed and the moral code that goes along with it and the Mass that goes along with it. We have to recognize it really does matter whether there's a Pope. It really does matter whether there is a Latin Mass. Both those things matter, but neither of them are the essential battle by themselves. And now what's happening? Millions of souls are discovering sedevacantism, but they won't discover tradition. And millions of souls have discovered the Latin Mass in the last 50 years, while they're not finding tradition. We are forgetting about one simple line the Blessed Virgin Mary said in Fatima, and she also said it in her recent apparitions of the last 500 years. Things are going to get worse and worse and worse. She said in Quito, until my miraculous victory comes. Remember that truth. Heaven says things are going to get worse and worse and worse. I spoke to a returning St. Peter priest about 7-8 years ago. We had one of our discussions and arguments. And he said, you SSPXers resistance guys, after resistance got started, you guys are unrealistic. We also recognize the world is getting worse. We recognize that. But you have to see at the same time, while there are elements in the Catholic Church that are getting worse, like the Pope Francis crowd. At the same time, there's a massive positive movement in the Roman Catholic Church. We used to have 99% all going down the path towards liberalism and modernism. Now it's 93%. That means an increase of 7%, 6%. On the one side, things are getting worse in the majority of places in the Roman Catholic Church, but there is a small minority which is getting better and better and better. If you have stage 5 cancer and you go to stage 4, you're doing better. You may still be dying, but you're doing better. So therefore, if 99% of Catholics are going away from God, and 1% are staying faithful, but now 93% are going away from God, and 7% are being faithful, that means things are not as bad, / they are better. Apply that statement to what Blessed Virgin Mary said, who is of heaven, who is the mother of God. She said things are going to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worser and worser and worser until they get the worstest. And when they get the worstest, that is when heaven shall intervene. But yet we see good signs. We see good signs. What do these good signs do? Spoke to my brother, who was here at my mother's funeral. And he said Archbishop Lefebvre would never have established the SSPX without the approval of Rome. Society priest. I pointed out and said, Father Tim, have you ever been to Boston, Kentucky? This is Boston, in case you don't know. To this property. Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, when he was still alive, he died in 1991, personally approved of 3 orders on this property. Archbishop Lefebvre approved of 2 convents. Sister Mary Redbridge's, that one didn't work out. And the other one was a Franciscan order of brothers, and that didn't work out. And the third one was the Benedictine Monastery, which is now in Silver City, New Mexico. That worked out. Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre told Father Cyprian, you go to America, and you establish traditional Benedictines without the permission of Rome. He also sent priests, at least 2 priests, who Lefebvre personally sent to here in Kentucky to be trained by Father Urban Schneider on the Latin Mass, and to be sent back in the battlefield and not work with the modernists. Archbishop Lefebvre lived in Europe, very far from here. He lived in Switzerland. There's 5 examples of Archbishop Lefebvre directly telling souls, you go to Kentucky, and you do not get approved by the modernists. And a priest who was born in Florida, that's the problem, raised in Kentucky. The rest of us was born in Kentucky. That's good. My oldest brother was born in Florida. Not perfect. Raised in Kentucky. What happened? You forgot. And now they're putting it on the website, the Society of St. Pius X, and their Facebook, which I can't stand. Other people follow it for me. I can't stand that stuff. Archbishop Lefebvre was a holy man. But he made a mistake when he consecrated those bishops. The Fraternity of St. Peter did the right thing. Not banned from the Facebook. The dispersion, that's just going on last week. We see many encouraging signs. We see, for instance, young families at the conservative new Mass. We see young families at the Latin Mass approved by the diocese. We see a bishop approved by the Little Church saying there's problems in our church, or there are problems of faith even. These are all positive signs. Where do they lead? How positive are they? And what are they doing? They're doing 2 things. Those who are in the Novus Ordo are hearing the Pope may not be the Pope. the Latin Mass is not the only thing. We have to also preserve the faith. Francis Bergoglio is a heretic. So, what does that mean? We got to be like Pope Benedict. We got to stick with the conservative Novus Ordo Mass. One boy told me in India, I can't stand this new Mass because they changed it in 2013 or 14 to say that the consecration for you and for many, whereas in traditional Mass we say for you and for all. He thought that the Novus Ordo Mass of 1969 was a traditional. And the change back to the traditional form, which was done about 11 years ago, was modern. And therefore he was opposed to the change to the traditional valid form. And he wanted to go back to the traditional modernist form. We used to have a game you speak of very often on the retreats. When I was a kid, we called it the sliding board game. We got bored of sliding down the sliding board. So we got a game where two sliding boards next to each other. And we would run up the board and try to be the last one down. Last one down wins. But it's cheating to grab onto the side of the board. You have to do it just by running, by trying to keep your balance. We got a lot of broken noses. And if you're really good, you can stay on the sliding board for a long time, but no one can stay on it. You can run and run and run and run and run and run, but you keep sliding down. And eventually, you're off the board. Those that are no good, they're off the board in a second. Those that are really good, 2 seconds. If you're really, really good, until you run out of gas and you go to the hospital. But all the way, you're off the board. And this is the sliding board game. So many are encouraged that a Novus Ordo bishop who has not given up the Novus Ordo and who doesn't really intend to. For instance, we hear other encouraging things now. There are problems in the council. Talk to your wife. Ask if there's problems in your husbandry. There are. Trust me. But that doesn't mean you're not a husband. Talk to the husband about the wife. Are there problems with her wifery and her motherhood? You better believe it. That's what he's talking to his buddies about at the bar. But she's still the wife. He's still the husband. So you're okay. They're just complaining. But if you're not married, problems or no problems, you gotta separate. It's the wrong series of questions. Many times in the confessional I've heard, bless you, Father, for I have sinned. It's been about 25, 35, 45 years since my last confession. What have you done? Not much. Been a pretty good guy. Really? Yeah. First wife, I was really mean to her. Second wife, But now my wife, we get along great. Pray all the time. Oh, you're great then. There's a problem called math. You're only allowed one wife, and that's the first one. You're supposed to be mean to your third wife, not the first one. And so, but hey, I'm doing great. I'm being nice to my third wife. It's the wrong debate. It's the wrong debate. So what's happening, instead of souls getting closer and closer to tradition like we say they are, they're actually getting more and more confused. So that perhaps another truth also applies, which it says in the gospel, these days shall be shortened for the sake of the elect. Because if these days are not shortened, no flesh shall be saved. We often read that passage in the Gospel of St. Matthew chapter 24, and we think it means guns, starvation, freezing to death in the winter, horrible physical suffering of being left in exile, that no flesh will be saved. And there will be many, many physical sufferings in the time of the Antichrist or in the time of the loss of faith. But many souls starve and go to heaven. Many souls, unless they lost their house, they would be damned. That's when they turn back to God. So what does it really mean when it says if these days are not shortened, no flesh will be saved? Perhaps what it means is no flesh will be able to grab onto the truth anymore. Now you have 50,000 levels of traditional Catholics who hate the new Mass in Vatican II. Now you're up to 20,000 levels of new Mass people who think Vatican II should be understood in the correct way, who think the new Mass could be tolerated, and they got all the same levels of lies and all the same levels of confusion the traditional Catholics used to have. Does this mean good sign? No. Notice also, as Archbishop Pfeiffer used to say, Archbishop Sheen used to say, and it's also a name of an old book, all they are is old errors, new labels. You will discover, no matter how new an idea is, says Bishop Sheen, it's not new after all. Go and see how the Greeks put it. They had it too. There are new lies. No, they're the old lies with new labels. The present combat of sedevacantism, for instance. Many say, in fact, Father Bishop Sanborn said, we pray daily for Jorge Bergoglio. We want him to live forever. Because he's filling sedevacantist churches by the droves. He's our best promoter we've ever had. Because Pope Benedict, he wore red shoes. Bishops wear white shoes, popes wear red shoes. He wore the red shoes. He had the nice crozier. He had the nice crucifix. That deceived people. It's bad for sedevacantism. He looked traditional. But Bergoglio, he's our hero. We're going to pay his doctor, give him the best doctor. Because Jorge Bergoglio, Pope Francis, is filling up sedevacantist churches. He says it's a kind of a half joke, but it's not really a joke. The reality is, every sin, John Donne said it best when he said in his poem, For Whom the Bell Tolls, pray not for whom the bell tolls, seek not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. Because when one piece of dirt goes out to the sea from France or from Belgium, Europe is the less. If one clot goes out, Europe is smaller. Not just France or Belgium. Europe is smaller. And if one clot comes to the shore, Europe is bigger. Therefore seek not to learn, for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. We are all part of humanity, one human race. We are all made by God for the salvation of our own individual souls and the salvation of the entirety of the human race. Therefore, a wicked pope is a detriment to the Hindus, a detriment to the Muslims, a detriment to the atheists, a detriment to the Roman Catholics, traditional and non-traditional alike. We have this idea. It's good for us. We have entered the soup of the lie of the modern world. Remember, there are 4 marks of our holy church. 1, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. Don't forget those last 2 marks. Catholic and apostolic. Catholic means universal. Wherever there is Catholic, we want all Catholic to be there. And universal means, and apostolic means, if there's not Catholic, put it there, convert it, and connect all things that they have Catholic authority that comes from God through the Pope and the bishops, down to the priests and deacons, to all the faithful. That's Catholic. The 2 marks of holy, apostolic, and Catholic are dead in the traditional movement. And the first mark of 1 is dead. All that matters is holy. What about holy? Consider that mark. It's a very dangerous one. If you own a business and you have one of those pornography stores on the side of the road, you're totally against theft. You're totally against vandalism. So you can keep your evil business going. That's positive. They still believe in a couple of commandments. No, it isn't. Because the whole business is evil. That business needs to be destroyed. It needs to be removed. But we still don't need theft. Whenever you decide you're going to promote one commandment but not the other 9, one truth, but not all the other 11 articles of the creed, you end up being a servant of the devil and not a servant of Christ. There is a grave error in sedevacantism. Very serious. Bishop Schneider, in fact, in his brief treatise on sedevacantism, which I went through this last couple of weeks, a few times, it's excellent. 100% perfect. Points out clearly what the church has taught in a very brief manner about the situation of the Pope. But he doesn't belong to the truth. Very good what he had to say. Is it encouraging? Not really. Because now Archbishop Schneider knows the right words. Vigano knows the right words. And though I can't prove it, I'm not interested in bothering my time with it. The signs are there that Schneider is a good cop and a bad cop, paid by the bad guys. And Vigano is a good cop and a bad cop, paid by the bad guys. And they're all on the same team. And what is their purpose? So that the sedevacantists can say, look, Vigano and Altman, they're starting to wake up. And we can say, look, Schneider, he's waking up. And even Vigano and Altman, at least they're seeing something. And we can fight halfway down the sliding board. This is not where the battle is. It's good if Vigano says something true. And he said many things that are true. But if you'll read Martin Luther, you'll discover that he believed Jesus Christ was God. And he was right. Martin Luther, if he was alive today, as impure and wicked as he was, he'd probably kill 90% of Protestants because they're too bad for him. Does that mean Luther was a good guy? He believed in consubstantiation, which is so much better than not believing in the Blessed Sacrament at all. Is it? It is not. The lie of consubstantiation is not better than the lie of not believing in the real presence. Consubstantiation is the belief that Jesus Christ is truly body and blood and soul and divinity of the Blessed Sacrament, which Martin Luther believed. But the bread is also truly there. They're together. Real bread and the real Christ glued together. That's what Luther believed. But the Protestants don't believe that anymore. Was Luther better? Go ask the devil. He's burning next to him. No, it's not better. Because both are contrary to the teaching of our Lord Jesus Christ. Both are contrary to our faith. So that Leo XIII, quoting St. Augustine, said, it doesn't matter. There's no difference in our belief as Catholic. That Abraham had 2 sons and Jesus Christ rose from the dead. No difference. Why do we believe Abraham had 2 sons? Because God said so. Why do we believe Jesus Christ rose from the dead? Because God said so. We have a supernatural faith. And because we believe, due to God saying so, there's no difference between Abraham had 2 sons and our Lord Jesus Christ rose from the dead. You should not be a Latin Mass Catholic that tolerates Vatican II, whether you have an illegal Mass in your house or a legal Mass in the church. You shouldn't be a sedevacantist. Whether you're a sedevacantist in the new Mass, and there's now thousands of them, because as we've said many, many times in the last 50 years, we used to point it out so many times, sedevacantism and the Novus Ordo are the same exact error. There are 2 sides of exactly the same coin. And that is the belief that whatever the Pope says must be obeyed and believed and followed. But the Pope is saying bad things. Therefore, he's not the Pope. Sedevacantism. But the Pope is believing and saying bad things. Therefore, they must not be that bad. Novus Ordo. Same exact premises, 2 opposite conclusions. When we forget, it doesn't matter which side of the coin you're on. They're both contrary to God. And they're both about the Pope as a person, rather than the Pope as a representative of God. If the Pope as a person has to be holy and of faith, then we have no way of knowing who is a Pope. St. Robert Bellarmine describes it best when he says, remember, our church is visible. And there are only 2 ways to get out of the church. Number 1, walk out, as hundreds of millions, in fact, hundreds and hundreds of millions of Catholics have done. If you are from anywhere in Europe, and if you're from anywhere in South America, all 100% of your ancestors were Catholic 700 years ago. Now, many are not. There's Protestant churches all down the road, because our ancestors walked out and started the Lutherans and the Baptists and the Anabaptists and all the Methodists and the Fourth or Street Baptist Church and non-denominational churches and every Protestant church that exists. They walked out. The second way to leave the church is to be excommunicated and be kicked out. And St. Relevant says, because our church is a visible organizational structure, unless you walk out or are kicked out, you're in. And we know that there will be many attacks of the church on the outside from the Protestants, from the Jews, from the Masons, from the Hindus, from all the false religions. And there will be attacks from the inside. In fact, there are prophecies that tell us that there will be future attacks in the church will be the most grave. They'll be the ones on the inside. This time they won't walk out. Luther walked out. Rampolla did not. Cardinal Mahony did not. Cardinal Bernardine did not. Pope Francis did not. And St. Relevant says, two requirements to be a Catholic, essential requirements: to be baptized, and he talks about external baptism, and to be professing the faith. External baptism means that a guy has a certificate, or he says, I was baptized, because maybe he's lying. We have a famous case in the 1100s of a pope, of a priest, another one in the 1200s, two different priests. Pope Innocent the 11th for one of them, Pope Innocent the 2nd for one of them, Pope Innocent the 3rd for the other one. And both priests were not baptized. They discovered they were not baptized. One was dead, the other one was still alive. He's not baptized, which means he's not a valid priest. So what did both popes say? Into the 2nd, 100 years before, and into the 3rd. Both priests were of and in the Catholic Church. But all their masses were invalid because they weren't valid priests. You had to be baptized to be a priest. But don't worry about this. This doesn't cause harm because they were within the church. They were accepted in the church. They thought they were in the church. They were visibly in the church. And when they died, they would not have lost their souls. Both in the 2nd and the 3rd both tell us that. But the other one, of course, is still alive. He was able to be reordained, rebaptized, reordained. He was okay. But the first one was already dead. Couldn't be done. St. Relevant talks about those two priests, and he says they are not the case of baptism of desire. Because baptism of desire, they're outside, they're visibly outside the church. In this case here, he calls it external baptism. Because there must be many mothers who lied about their children being baptized because they were afraid of times past. There must be many who went all through life. Myself, I've already done about 4 or 5 baptisms because we couldn't find the proof of the baptism of the person. They're 50 years old, 60 years old, 70 years old, and turns out they're not sure if they were baptized. They were already married. They were already, none of them were priests, but they were all married. They were already being Catholic all their lives, and they couldn't find their certificate, and they couldn't remember what church they were baptized in, some of them. So we did a conditional baptism. What would have happened if they weren't baptized and they died? Innocent the 2nd and the 3rd said they would go to heaven, unless, of course, you're guilty of mortal sin and unrepentant. They belong to the external, visible church. St. Relevant says this is external membership. Then, the second way is profession of faith. And he says external profession of faith. That is, I'm a Catholic in good standing. You cannot know whether he believes the dogmas or doesn't believe the dogmas. Even Bishop Sanborn says you might have many heresies. You're still a Catholic. So, in order to leave the church, it has to be a formal heresy, and they got to walk out. External profession of faith. So that we know at any time in the history of the church, there will be some priests, we don't know which ones perhaps, some bishops, and perhaps some popes. There are some signs in history of some very wicked popes who were not, nor just morally wicked, but who were working to destroy the church. Some in the 1800s, early 1800s. But they never professed heresies. But they were most likely Masons or working with the bad guys and preparing the way for Vatican II 100 and 200 years in advance. Were they members of the church if they really were Masons? Of course they were. They belonged to the external membership of the church, and they weren't kicked out. It's a visible church. Now, how is it that this heresy or an error of sedevacantism is becoming popular again? Very simple. He's bad, he's evil, he's doing evil things, he's not with me. That's it. He has all these sins, and if you say he committed 50 sins, that's 50 proofs. 500, that's 500 proofs. 5,000, that's 5,000 proofs. When they're proof of nothing, because sins don't take away authority. 0 sins don't give authority. 1,000,000 sins don't take authority away. Someone who is elected walks out of the balcony and he is called the Holy Father and recognized by the official people of Rome, which are the cardinals, as the Holy Father. That's the Pope. He may be a good one. He may be a wicked one, but he's the visible representative of St. Peter, of Christ, a successor of St. Peter, and we know their names from the time of Pope Francis all the way back to St. Peter himself. We know their names. Some were very wicked. John the 12th, I think it was, became Pope when he was 18, died at 22, turned the entire Vatican into a brothel house, died of venereal diseases. He wasn't holy in his doctrine either. But he had too little time because he was sick all the time and he died. That was the Pope. There were other popes who promoted evil men. Liberius promoted the heresy of Arianism because he wanted to go back home. Paschal II was just a wicked man himself. Honorius was declared to be in hell by Pope St. Leo II, who was a pope 2 popes after him, only a couple years after he died, because the pope in between died very quickly. St. Leo II said, Honorius, the pope a couple years ago, he's in hell. When the saint says that, you listen. Well, he didn't say he wasn't the pope. He was accused and condemned of his heresy, of his promotion of the heresy of monothelitism, but they never said he wasn't the pope. Now compare Pope Francis with Pope Paul VI. Compare Pope Benedict with Pope Pius XII. Now, when Paul VI became Pope, he was far more wicked in comparison to Pius XII than Francis is compared to Benedict. Pius XII said the Latin Mass. Pius XII taught the faith. Paul VI brought in the new Mass and forced it on everybody's throat. Paul VI prayed with heretics. Paul VI smashed lies and heresies down everybody's throat. Paul VI was guilty for at least the death of several innocent cardinals. Paul VI crushed anyone who was good and raised up anyone that was bad until he died and most likely went to hell. Many people were scandalized and said, that man cannot be a pope. But most Catholics stood up and said, no, he's just a wicked pope. And the only way to be faithful to him is to be faithful to his true papacy and to the ancestors that came before him. So Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre said in 1974, the only way to remain faithful to Pope Paul VI, to the Holy Father, is to have nothing to do with this neo-modernist Rome and neo-modernist Rome and its neo-modernist tendencies, and to remain faithful to the light of faith shines over Rome again. And we will be faithful to the Pope by being faithful Catholics. That is, faithful to Pope Paul VI by being faithful Catholics. And the Church maintains its integrity, though it has a wicked man atop. We already have the defenses against it. Now come forward. Pope Francis, he's so bad. He teaches the same thing Benedict taught. He promotes the same heresies Pope Benedict became promoted, and he's only Pope because Benedict made him Pope. If you want to blame somebody, blame Benny. Don't blame Francis. And so there's a false dichotomy between the Holy Pope Benedict and Pope Francis, the wicked. They're both wicked, and their wickedness is irrelevant as regards their papacy. There are people that are bringing the church down. And when you look at the entirety of the church, is the traditional movement all that encouraging? Look at it from the perspective of heaven. If they're not coming back to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God, it's not encouraging. Especially when they're being stopped from coming back to it. Because now you can have whatever level of lie you want. You can be a conservative Novus Ordo, an illegal parish A. You can be really conservative Novus Ordo going to a Latin unapproved Mass. Because now the Fraternity of St. Peter priests and some of the canceled priests are now going around saying illegal masses, fully approving of Vatican II, fully unapproved by their bishops. Is that a good sign? Why are they saying these masses? To survive. But what must be done? Bring souls back to Christ. Bring souls back to the truth, the whole truth, and the other truth. And our Sister Marcel Lefebvre manifested that truth clearly. Father Hannafin, my old pastor here in Kentucky, manifested that truth clearly. We must continue to manifest that truth and not fall into the traps of the good cop Schneider and bad cop Vigano, or good cop Vigano and bad cop Schneider, both leading the souls down the path back to modernism, not down the path to God, and both putting blockages. What should our Sister Vigano and Bishop Schneider be doing? I completely disagree with Bishop Sanborn. He's a saint of Vicondis. He should not be. But what is he doing? He's saying Mass. He's taking steps against Vatican II, though he is mistaken. He's doing something to stop Vatican II, even though there are many errors. What about Schneider and Vigano? They're going to join Rush Limbaugh in the talk radio section of heaven. All they're doing is bibbling and babbling. They're not doing something. Mr. Sanborn may be making a mistake, maybe an error, but at least he's doing something to maintain our faith. There are confessions being heard. He's trying to teach the truth, even though he's mistaken. Schneider and Vigano are not. They are not saying Mass for the faithful. They are not establishing seminaries. They are not keeping people in tradition. They are causing confusion in the Novus Ordo world and holding back countless Novus Ordo people from the entrance into true tradition. They are roadblocks on the path to Jesus Christ and the truth. They are not helping the situation. Now there's a big debate amongst the Novus Ordo conservatives. Don't go with the traditional Catholics. They're way too far gone. They're too right wing. The Lord Jesus Christ was not on the right wing. That guy was a thief. He wasn't on the left wing either. He was also a thief. And without the man in the middle, they're both damned. The Lord Jesus Christ is not right wing. He is not left wing. He stands in the center on the cross, and he is despised by all. But from that cross, he says, if I be lifted up, I will draw all things to myself. And from that cross, he bleeds and brings salvation to souls. And those, such as the thief on the right, if you stay on the right, thief, you shall be damned. But if you come with me and enter my sacred heart, if you come with me, you shall this day be with me in paradise. Don't stay a thief on the right side or on the left, on the conservative or on the liberal side. They're just two different levels of flames in hell. We are not here to promote conservatism over liberalism, but Christ over the devil, and the true church over all false churches, and truth over error and heresy, and the truth never changes. And beware of the new labels and the new excitement and the new smart people that are accepting the same old lies. Don't fall for them. Keep the love of the Blessed Virgin Mary in the heart. Pray for a deep faith. And remember, the truth is still the truth. It never has changed. It never will, even in these so-called confusing times. And we'll close there. God bless you all. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.